What's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary. And I'm here with my beautiful wife. Say hi, boo.
Hi, everyone. This is AKDI, and I'm from Turkey. And today we are reviewing Black Venus.
Yes, this is a 2010 French drama film, a historical drama film, directed by Abdellatif Kechiche, who is a Tunisian/French film director. He has been highly rewarded for his other films that he has made, such as Blue is the Warmest Color in 2013, which won the Palme d'Or in France. He also made another great film in 2007 called The Secret of the Grain, that won many awards as well. But this was a film that came out in 2010 between those two, about the life of Sarah Baartman, who was also known as the Venus Hottentot or Sarah Baartman. I hope I'm saying that right. I believe it's in Afrikaans or Dutch. And she was a South African woman who was taken to the UK to act in this show that portrayed black people as like savages, and also people were fixated on her very large derriere. She had a big old booty, and yeah, she lived a very hard life in Europe, and this is a tragic story about her, the true story as well, and I believe this story is very important for Black History Month. We watched this film a few years ago, but I thought it would be important to revisit it and see if the film was just as good as I remember, because I was watching the 24th the other day, and I said, oh, this is not as good as I thought. But we watched it again recently over the past few days, and I can say it's just as good as I remember, if not better, and even more important. But how did you feel after we watched this film?
Yeah, like watching the second time, I don't think it lost anything for me. It was still very like hard to watch in terms of like its themes, and this is a true story. So, you know, these things actually happened to actual Sarah Baartman or Sarah Baartman. And that's why I think it's just like kind of hard to watch for me, but at the same time, like the setting, the like, you know, the dialogue, I think it's a really good movie overall. Like,
yeah,
it's made very good.
Yeah, Abdellatif has a direction style which has been described as a naturalist form, where there is no like sentimental music playing in the background. There aren't any large special effects. He just tries to capture the raw emotions of a scene, and also just like literally drop the camera there, making you feel like you're watching something and you're just a spectator rather than watching something meant to entertain you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely feel that, and I feel like you can definitely feel like, you know, Sarah's journey and how sort of devastating life was for her, especially after like she came to Europe.
So before we watched this movie, had you ever heard of Sarah Baartman before?
No.
No? I remember hearing about her from my father many, many years ago when I was a kid, and my dad would always drop like random gems about like Black history and Black famous figures in time. And I remember hearing about this woman in relation to how Black women are, you know, portraying themselves in mass media, in American mass media, right? So looking at this film, it's hard for me to like divorce that part of the analysis I have of this story as well. And we're going to dive more into that as we get into the story. But like, what are your big takeaways after watching this movie?
I mean, I think one of the most important themes for me, just like being a woman in any time in history, is extremely hard. And especially if you're a woman who has dreams and ambitions, but the world doesn't allow you to do that, especially for Sarah. Like, she's a Black woman from Africa, and the world is like particularly hard for her. And yeah, I was sort of like looking at it from like a feminist psychologist like point of view. Mm-hmm. And yeah, that's kind of like where I looked at it from. Yeah,
I also, you know, analyze this film a bit with a feminist perspective, because a lot of the attacks on Sarah seem to be because of her gender, just as much, if not sometimes more, than her race, or what they perceive to be her race. And that is a very important aspect that we'll dive into, I believe, in this discussion, which I think will be very lively. But I think also, I think my big takeaway from this film is that it's a lot about the entertainment industry and Black people's place in it. When we think about modern pop culture, modern mainstream culture, it all derives from Black people, right? All the major genres were basically created by African Americans. But there's also a darker history in that it came from us, but not first from us, in the sense like modern entertainment is built on minstrel shows where people would dress up in blackface and put on shows portraying us in very negative stereotypes. And also, like in European history, there used to be actual zoos that you could go to in Germany, in France, where you would see Black people in the same vicinity as you would an elephant or a giraffe or a water buffalo or something like that. So that's a part of entertainment as well. So I'm going to be analyzing it from that perspective a little bit, and also giving props to the acting as well. So let's talk about the acting. The person who plays Sarah Baartman is an actress, little known actress named Yahima Torres, and she is a Cuban national who was living in France, and she accidentally met Abdellatif Kechiche when she was walking down the street. She tells the story that, she was going to some cafe and Abdel said, "Damn, I want that girl to be in my movie about Sarah Baartman." What did you think about the acting of not only Yahima, but everybody else in the film?
Yeah, I mean, Black Venus doesn't have a lot of lines in the movie, which I would assume that it's probably harder to just get that emotion onto the screen. And I thought she was just spectacular because, we can see it in her face, we can see it in her tears, we can see it in her silence. And also, for her being a Black woman as well in today's society, and trying to going back and recreate that painful life actual Sarah Baartman lived, I feel like it would have been emotional for her. So I really I'm happy that she decided to take this role just like that as a surprise. And
Yeah, it's literally the story of Desert Rose, right? We watched that film about this girl who became a model on accident while she was working at McDonald's or something. It's kind of amazing that she got this role and brought it to life so well, because literally when you look at her on the screen and then you look at pictures that they drew of the real Sarah Baartman, it's like she was reincarnated, you know? And that's the crazy thing about it. The second thing I have to say is I feel like, she got robbed because this film didn't win any awards like a lot of other Abdellatif's movies, and I find that to be emblematic of white supremacy, because how come this story, which to be frank, you watch it and it might make you say, damn, white people are horrible, right? It might make you say that, and I feel like the Academy, which is basically all white, looked over this film and looked over Yahima's performance, because those were real tears dropping in certain scenes. And she really, was doing those dances, and she was really embodying that character to, I think, a level that not many other actresses could ever reach. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And especially I'm guessing that this is maybe one of her only roles, or at least her only big role. And she was just shining in the role. And what if she got the opportunity to do more? I feel like we could have seen great things from her. She could have been the next Cuban Viola Davis.
Yeah, the interesting thing is when you look up Yahima Torres online, you don't find anything on her, no Instagram, social media, anything. I'm hoping the best for her, maybe she just got married, had kids, and she's just living a quiet life somewhere in France or back in Cuba, wherever, right? Or I feel once again she was robbed of the opportunity to really evolve. And it also makes me be critical of this film in another way. In the real story, Sarah Baartman was sort of used up for entertainment and then forgotten. So did Abdellatif sort of redo the same thing? He made this person a star, made her get naked on camera, abused on screen for 2.5 hours, and then forgot about her. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, as a director, he's not responsible for, making her a star. And I think he certainly did her because it was her own talent, of course, but he sort of brought her up into this platform a little bit. But I think the only person who can answer this is Yahima Torres.
Right.
Like, we could not know, like, maybe she got, other films that were offered to her and she said just no. Or maybe there were, like, just a bunch of factors that added up, like her being a black woman, like her being Cuban, and all that, and her being unknown in, like, the film circle. Maybe, like, those things, prevented her from getting any offers.
Right.
Like,
maybe she never got the agent. Maybe people typecasted her thinking she could only play this type of role.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, in French cinema, I can't imagine there's like a lot of demand and need for like, shapely black women all the time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yahima, if you're listening to this, if you just so happen to listen, let us know what you're up to. We would love to hear your story. Simon and AKDI would like to interview you. Great job on this movie. This is hands down one of my favorite films of all time, and is largely 99% based on your acting ability. So shout out to you.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Shout out.
All right. Well, let's just jump into this story because there's a lot to get into. So, this film is about 2.5 hours, and the first, I would say, 10 to 12 minutes of this film, it opens up in a French academy where some professor is giving a lecture in a room full of his students, and he unveils the curtain on this statue that we think is a statue of this large African woman, and he starts giving this lecture saying this is a Hottentot, and this is a savage straight from Africa. And he also points at the graph and shows like diagrams of her vagina, which has an elongated labia, if I know the lady parts right.
Yeah.
Correct me if I ever say anything wrong. Right?
Yeah.
So she has an elongated labia, and he's, showing these pictures and diagrams saying like, this is can only be found in this race of people. And he also starts passing around the room her, basically her pickled vagina and her pickled labia, and also her actual skull as well, and her brain, which is in a glass jar as well. And while he's giving this lecture, the students are listening very intently, and he says, to finish his speech, he says, this proves that the Negro can never be as good or smart as the white man, because look at it, look at her skull, look at our skull, look at even the Egyptian pharaohs. One could even say, yes, the Egyptian pharaohs were dark-skinned men, but they were essentially more of the race like us, as in white men. So he gives this very long, basically race science speech, and it's probably one of the most jarring things that you see throughout this film, and it hits you like in the very first minute. So what did you think about that scene?
I guess like throughout the scene, I was thinking sort of like how ridiculous, race sciences, and I can't believe that people actually, made assumptions about certain races, and, race doesn't exist, but I will say it because, that's the terminology that we use. But, it was sort of giving ridiculous, but at the same time, like, sort of how people were influenced to see black people inhumanely and like animals, and they did it like with their own will, which was just sad to see. And like also from the first moment you see like this vagina in the jar pickled, and you go like, what the hell is that? Like, what is happening here? And then like, you see Sarah's statue, or a black woman's statue, and you're like, okay, like this is, I guess, interesting, and how did she ended up here, basically. And I think the beginning is intriguing, but also like sad as well, and it makes you question like your thoughts on race.
Right. Exactly. It should make you question your thoughts on race. And you said, I can't believe people did this back in the day, but I feel like people still do this, unfortunately, now. Yeah. Like recently, something I think about is like one of my coworkers that I work with said to me one time, like, you're black, so you must be used to the hot weather. I can't believe you like the cold weather more than hot weather, right? Something like that. And that's essentially like race essentialism. You assume because of my skin color or what you think I am that I have natural abilities or dislikes, likes, etc., right? And yeah, back then it was just a bit more intense, but unfortunately that stuff still simmers now. This scene also made me think about this film in a different way, in the sense that this is like an alien abduction story. I know we're looking at this film like as a historical drama, but it's essentially the same thing as like imagine a guy walking one day and like a beam of light comes down and he's taken to this totally different world where people do experiments on him, twist his body up, and then, parade him around like some sort of like science object, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, a way of looking at this film makes me think about it that way. And secondly, it made me think about, not recently, but a few months ago, I read this book, Is the Turk a White Man? And it made me think about how, at the beginning of the Republic of Turkey, there were some people that were obsessed with proving that the Turks were just like Europeans, right? And so they would do things similar to this. So when we're looking at this film, it's not, just the British did this or the French did this. This was very common throughout many parts of the world at the height of race science, which lasted for a long time. Race science and this sort of way of being lasted much longer than the way we think of race now. And that's why we still have those after effects. Like, the Turkish scientists that I read about, they were pulling out skulls too. Right. And they were doing this in America and in the UK and in, everywhere. Right. So it made me think about that.
Yeah. And, like you said in the beginning, you saw some sort of like correlation into how like women are portrayed in the media and stuff like that. And even though, like you said, we don't have race science exactly how it was back in the day, we still have stereotypes. And I feel like also the media pushes a lot of those stereotypes, especially about black people and black women. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of, I don't know, what you were saying just sort of took me to there. Mm-hmm. But we can move on.
Yeah, no,
we'll talk more about that.
There's a lot to say, but one last thing I want to say about that, in that scene, it was a woman who was there but not there, and men were talking about the woman's body, right? And it makes me think about how right now in my country we're deciding on women's lives, and in many other parts of the world, women's lives are in the hands of men. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to say, because I was thinking this when I watched the first scene when they handed over like the pickled vagina, basically. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking, like, this is the first time these men are seeing a vagina. And that's unfortunate that they're being introduced to like that.
Yes.
But that's it.
Yeah. And about the elongated labia, there is, I believe, right, I can't find it right now. I should have looked this up beforehand. But there is, I'm finding this out right now on Wikipedia. This is a feature of certain women and other in Africa who develop this naturally or through artificial stretching. And I remember reading about it. I don't know the exact name. I think it's called Kizu or Kizi or something like that. But in Central and East Africa, there is a tribe that practices elongating the labia of women as a way of increasing the pleasure for women during sex. Right, I'll try to look it up and maybe try to find it during this. But I just wanted to say this, like how they were trying to make Venus seem so foreign and savage because of this. Right, it comes from an African tradition where they actually viewed women as equal in the sense that women should get pleasure from sex too. Right? Mm-hmm. Now in Africa, it's widely diverse. In the same continent, you have people stretching labias to make these women come. You have other men sewing up the vagina and cutting off clits, right? So
crazy continent.
Yeah, crazy continent with crazy contradictions. But I also wanted to say that too about the fact she had an elongated labia.
Yeah.
So, basically the next scene, we go back in time and we see Venus, or Sarah, actually alive. And she's in a cage. And this white man is saying, like, now before you, I will reveal a savage from Africa, the Venus Hottentot. And so he lets Venus out of the cage and she starts grunting and like attacking the people. And they do various like tricks on stage. Like, they make her dance, they make her play music, and at the end of the show, he invites people in this British crowd to come and like touch Venus's butt, right? Because she has this very, very large butt. And after the show, you know, Venus goes back into the dressing room and takes several drinks, and then you know, the white man says, "All right, time to do it again." Like, after this very intense performance, because the first performance scene is like just as long, if not longer, than the, you know, first scientific scene. So what did you think about that?
Yeah, like, you know, we see this sort of scenes throughout the movie a couple of times. This is definitely the lightest one, just an introduction, but it's still very intense. It's very, like, just sad, because you can obviously tell that Sarah is sort of emotionally suffering as well as physically, because they are touching her without her consent. Mm-hmm. And yeah, she's, you know, she sort of has like this chain on her neck and stuff like that. Like, she's just uncomfortable. And I feel like what like the director and also Yahima Torres did, like, you feel uncomfortable watching it as the audience, as if like you're there and you're Sarah. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I really like that. And but this scene is, you know, like any other this type of scene, that's very, very intense and very sad. Very intense.
I would also say, like, I just want to just jump to this part. You know, what I really like about this film is that it is a period piece where everything looks so real, like from the costumes of the people in the crowd to the dialect of English that they're speaking, and how also, like, it's a bit international as well, like, because the white man who is the partner, I would say owner of Sarah, he like switches from like Dutch to English and different languages as well, because that's what it was at the time. Like, we tend to think of the past as more, you know, static, as in people didn't move or transition, but we've been living in an internationally, globally mixed world for a long time too. And so I really like that part of the film. The actual performance is very hard to watch, especially I remember the first time we watched it, I said, whoa, this is really intense, especially after the first scientific scene. Then we jumped to this. It was so hard to watch. And, you know, throughout the film, Yahima, who plays Sarah, has the coldest like grill on her face. Like, she does not smile. It's always very intense. The sweat is like beating from her eyes and stuff like that. And there's a certain level of coldness that the actress gives that's so powerful. Go ahead.
I mean, you know, I feel like you just imagine at that point she's just numb to everything that's going on, and she's just trying to survive. Mm-hmm. And, you know, at this point, we don't really know, like, you know, her dynamic with this guy. Mm-hmm. And, yeah, you just feel like, I think in the first scene of this, like, you just feel like she's sort of being kept there without her will.
Yeah. If you watch this film, you know, definitely the first time you get the impression, oh, this is slavery, right? But as we'll talk about later, this isn't a traditional, like, slave narrative film. It's not like 12 Years a Slave or Emancipation or something like that. This is a bit different, right?
It's kind of shocking, actually, how people in this movie are turned off by slavery.
A bit. And there's some context there, because I just finished reading that book about, you know, British history of slavery and black people there. So it's interesting there. But one thing that I definitely have to say, because I have to get this out, I used to be a rapper. And when you're a black person on stage in front of a bunch of white eyes, there is a very interesting dynamic that's going on, where on the one hand, you know, at least in our modern day and age, you're creating art and you're expressing yourself, right? But you also want to keep people entertained. And as we've seen, you know, even when we're trying to entertain people with good faith and with good intentions, it could be misinterpreted, right? Like, people watch Tupac on stage or James Brown on stage, and even though they're giving their heart and soul and pouring their life into their music, people might just walk away with that and say, nigga, 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 get down. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And just
create stereotypes.
Yeah, create stereotypes based on that, right? And, you know, there's a fine line that, you know, modern black entertainers walk of true artistry and minstrelsy, right? And you don't want to be a caricature of black people, right? But you also don't want to, you know, be like too guarded against that. You know what I mean? Because we are playing characters. Jay-Z is a character on stage just as much as Prince was a character on stage. You know what I mean? And taking it even further back in time, I'm sure it's hard for me to say this, but I don't think that crossed Sarah's mind in the sense like I'm creating negative stereotypes about black people.
Yeah.
Right? Because it was hard to even imagine where the world was going to go at that point, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's not like there was a discussion where people were saying black people are equal to white people. So it's like black people didn't already have a good impression in the world, or like they weren't, taken seriously and stuff like that. Yeah, maybe where Sarah was, there was no slavery and people were trying to
there was slavery in the UK.
There was, but I'm saying that time where she was in her context.
Yeah, in 1810 there still was slavery technically. I'm not trying to just be a nitpicker, but I'm just pointing that out.
Yeah,
for the people.
I'm just saying, like, the point I'm trying to make is that I don't think she thought of, like, it could get worse.
Yeah.
Because it was already bad.
It was already pretty bad, right? And there was no room for that. But like I said at the beginning of this review, right? Like, my father first told me about Sarah Baartman in relation to black entertainment and black women's bodies in this white supremacist world that we live in. So I think, if you're watching this film and you're a black person who loves the arts, you love music, you love to do that sort of thing, you have to, you should take something from this film where it's like, we don't want to just be used and abused, and then on top of that, have our images and likeness just be used to perpetuate more negative things about us. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because I think that's, why Sarah resonates with so many people, because if we break the story down, she should just be another lost girl in the world that we sort of just forgot about.
Yeah.
But everywhere around the world, people rally around her and champion her because of what she went through. You know what I mean? But
the problem with that is, like, I don't think, and this includes Sarah and everyone else since, like, until today, who are, like, entertainers, black entertainers, female black entertainers, there's nothing that they can, like, completely do to change this perspective, because it's not only up to them, it's also up to white people, it's also up to, like, the Hollywood system, like, the entertainment system. Like, they could be the best ever act, best ever art, they could make that. And, if the people who are watching still have those stereotypes and are racist in a way, they will still see them like that. So it's not something that should be just put on their shoulders, because at the end of the day, I'm not specifically talking about Sarah, but, like, black entertainers today, they are trying to make art. They are trying to make their voice heard, their struggles heard, and express themselves however they want to. And just saying, like, just putting this on them, I don't think it would be fair. I just feel like, it's hard for me not to see Sarah bent over shaking her ass and not also think of Megan Thee Stallion bent over shaking her ass, or Nicki Minaj, or Cardi B, or anybody else, right? Like, I think, those women would, and here's me talking like a man telling what women should do, but I think, once again, black entertainers, and especially black female entertainers, should watch this story, learn about this story, and realize, you are free to do whatever you want. Make WAP, Megan, use your knees, you know what I mean? But at the same time, also remember, like you just said, whether they like it or not, that show that they're putting on in the white audience's mind might be no different than the Sarah Baartman show. Does that make sense? And on top of that, let's keep it real. Nicki Minaj and Megan Thee Stallion, Cardi B, they're not making as much money off their music, their shows, their twerking as the white men who actually own the record labels and control the streaming platforms and everything. Yeah. So... yeah, but those shows like Nicki Minaj or like Megan Thee Stallion, they represent also something different today, in a sense that they represent, like, female freedom of expression, expressions of your sexuality, owning and liking and loving your own body, so I don't think it's like the exact same thing. There is that element of like fetishization still to this day. But like I said, if Miley Cyrus can twerk without having the same issues, then they should be able to as well.
But it's never been the same, you know.
I know. And I'm sure like those women already think about this. And they already like, you know, think I'm a black woman in this world, and, you know, I know how I could be, you know, perceived in certain ways. But they still do it regardless because they just own up to it. Like, you know, that video, I don't remember which song it was, but Megan Thee Stallion did of like the like this white man and he was like watching Megan Thee Stallion's you know video. You remember that? Like, you know, those type of things. She's expressing her opinion, and she's saying like these white men fetishize about us, and then like they also badmouth us at the same time, and they don't give us our rights while they want to like basically be with us.
Right.
That's a freedom of expression, and I think that's powerful.
I think it is too. Like, because once again, I think, you know, your art can be expressed in ways that some people might find, you know, offensive, right? Or they might find it as not to the betterment of society or for your particular section of society, right? Like some people might say Megan Thee Stallion and Nicki Minaj are hurting black folks by putting out their negative image of black women just being sluts that want to twerk, right? As some people might say, right? That's not what I think. But I support Megan or Nicki having the right to do what they want to do. I'm just saying, like, you know, even if white men fetishize you, that might be one white man. Another man might be saying like, oh, that's just what they're good for in another way. You get what I'm saying?
I get what you're saying, but that's not something black women can control.
Right.
Like I said, it depends on the audience.
Right.
And there, like, throughout the history, there has been many, many black women who acted right, you know, in terms of like the society.
Right.
And how the other members of the black community wanted them to act. And guess what? Like, they have still been shunned upon. And, you know,
I agree with you,
so,
because
like, it doesn't really matter, and it's not their responsibility.
I agree with you, because like I always say, white supremacy and anti-blackness is white people's problem. It's not our problem.
Yeah.
It's the situation that we have to deal with, but white folks have to, you know, in their own way. And not just white folks, but all people, because all people are dealing with anti-blackness, even black people, right? We all have to check our anti-blackness as the problem. But the majority of the issue lies in the hands of people racialized as white, and also people who uphold white supremacy. Yeah. So if you are looking at, you know, a Megan or a Nicki or a Sarah Baartman and saying that's what they all do, that's what they're good for, they are savages, they are harlots and whatever, that's your problem, right? Instead of letting people be who they want to be and be their full self so that they can contribute to society as much as they can. You know what I mean? It's
not really an issue they can fix.
Right.
The only people who can fix it are the white people.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
And the difference between Sarah and them, and I feel like, is like Sarah is not in control of the show.
Yeah.
She's not in control. Maybe she's an artsy person, you know, because in the movie, it's like when she dances and sings, right? There's some connotation that she enjoys that.
And she also has musical talent.
Yeah,
like she plays the violin actually really well.
Yeah, like she enjoys that the most within the show that she's doing. And maybe like if she did her own show with however she wanted, maybe she would have did like some traditional dances and songs.
Right. And a traditional, like, you know, in my traditional rapper mind, Sarah got a bad record deal.
Yeah.
She got a bad record deal and she got a bad manager. She's essentially Tina Turner.
Wow.
the 19th century Tina Turner, you know, and she's just with the white Ike. If we're keeping it real. But yeah, like, once again, the Sarah Baartman story has a lot to tell people who are in entertainment, because in a sense, you will be on stage rapping songs or singing songs that you don't like, putting on an image that's not yours because you got in this label or deal that says you got to do this, right? And so, yeah, that's another way of looking at the Sarah Baartman story, like through that lens. But let's jump ahead a bit. So yeah, basically, after the show, we see Sarah, take off the wardrobe, the mask, the costume, and she's at home and she's like a regular person. She seems to be living with the white guy who is her manager. What was his name? Hendrik is her manager, and they seem to be living together. And Hendrik is like geeked up about the show. Like, he's carving the figurines that they're gonna sell of Venus, and he's telling her like, yeah, Venus, we just gotta keep on doing these acts and we're gonna be so rich. And Venus essentially like drinks a lot of alcohol, like shot after shot of whiskey, and she goes into her bedroom and essentially like cries herself to sleep, and she doesn't want to actually be around Hendrik, really. And one day Hendrik says, why are you always sulking about, you got to stop smoking, you need to eat more because you're losing weight, we need to keep you nice and fat. And Sarah says, the show isn't going like how you wanted it, how you said it would go. Like, the people are touching on me, they're hurting me, I'm tired a lot of the time, why do we keep on doing this? I kind of don't want to do this anymore. And so he like breaks down to her like, you said that we were going to be partners, and he sort of like flips it back on her, like reverse psychology, and says like, I took you from Cape Town, where would you be without me? I let you breastfeed my own children, like, don't do this to me, Sarah. You have to be stronger than this. I'm working so hard. I'm breaking my back, Sarah, for us. And so he tries to like win Sarah over by buying her new gifts, getting her like black male servants that will drive her around the city and stuff like that. But Sarah doesn't really seem to be biting, and she still seems to look pretty sad and depressed and despondent. What did you think about any of those scenes?
Yeah, like Hendrik's character, he's very manipulative because he acts like he actually cares about Sarah. Like, he says, you're part of my family, you're my partner, you're not my employee, and all sorts of things. And I feel like, I don't know if this is wrong, and correct me if it is, but I feel like maybe Sarah owed him some money, and like now she was sort of paying her debt to her, because we never kind of see how much Sarah is earning. Like, we don't ever see him giving Sarah money.
Well, she definitely has money for tobacco and whiskey, because she is never without that.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of like how she drowns her pain and boredom of her life. And and Hendrik is like, I feel like Hendrik is like who Trump would be if Trump lived in like 18th century.
Melania, get out there, Melania. We can do this. We're gonna make money. Just get naked one more time.
Yeah, and also I got the impression, like when they had that talk, and then Sarah went to bed, and Hendrik went to her door and said like, let me see you, open the door. And Sarah said like, no, I'm sleeping. And she went to bed, but she looked a bit scared. So I'm also guessing maybe he, abused her sexually. Yeah. In a maybe one or two times. I don't know. Like, I just got that feeling.
There is a part of that story, like throughout the movie, that feels a bit hidden, right? Yes. Like Sarah's sexual relationship with Hendrik, and then also other characters who pop up later. Like, we don't see it, but you kind of get that feeling too, that that's a part of the equation as well. Yeah,
because it's like, he doesn't have a woman, and he says like, I left my wife and kids for you and stuff, and and she gets like shit-faced like all the time, right? Because she's trying to drown out her pain, and when she's like that, she doesn't really have control over her limbs anymore. And I feel like maybe at those times he might have taken advantage of her.
Plus, also they know about her elongated labia, right? So how else would you know that unless you saw her naked, right? True. So I can assume there is a relationship, maybe sexual, with Hendrik that
it's an abusive relationship.
It's definitely power abusive. Even if she like consented, maybe it's still a weird power dynamic, right? Sleeping with your manager, right? Sleeping with your producer, sleeping with your label boss.
Okay,
it's all bad, right? It's all bad, right? But unfortunately, that's how a lot of women get on in the industry. Unfortunately, too.
I mean, this sort of like dynamic also reminded me of that, like those movies we see where. Little girl from little town wants to become famous. Dream
girls, right?
Girls, and Pearl.
Pearl.
No, like Pearl is not exactly.
That's this movie. That's the opposite of this.
Yeah, and then they get abused, and I don't know. They accidentally get into prostitution or porn industry or something, and they just get exploited.
Yeah, I think the only criticism you could have of this film is that it's the traditional story of the lost girl in the big city who falls victim to all the vices, right? The girl with starry-eyed dreams of making it in Hollywood, right? Similar to The Substance to some degree, kind of. You know, that's maybe the only criticism you could have of this film. Maybe that it's too brutal and maybe too long. Like maybe some scenes could have been clipped. But yeah, exactly like what you said. Like this is another way of looking at this film. You know?
Yeah. I definitely, thought of that when watching it.
Yeah. So, Sarah starts hanging out with the black servants, and she starts learning English a bit because, she essentially only speaks with Hendrik. Hendrik speaks Dutch, and I guess somehow Sarah learned Dutch as well. But one time during a show, after they perform, some people are saying, like, this show is indecent, this show is not right, and they get approached by these people who are with the, Free African Society, right? Like the Society to End African Colonization or Slavery or something like that. And they go up to Hendrik and say, we hear that you're keeping this African woman against her will and forcing her to dress indecently, and we want to see your papers. And he says, I shall not, good sir, and I bid you a good day. And so, this is like the beginning of sort of like the fall of this show, because some people are complaining that, this is indecent. Well, then we get taken to like this major court scene where Hendrik is testifying before the court with his lawyer and all the audience of London there to see that, I found this woman in the Cape, and, she came on her own volition, and we do this show, and it is an act, and she is an actress. And the people in the audience are just aghast, like, how dare he say this black woman is an actress, right? And the lawyer for Hendrik says, the people that are watching the show know that it is an act just like any other play, and because Sarah is fighting against her enslavement in the play shows that this is, once again, a play, right? And the people of the jury are sort of like unconvinced. Some people are, challenging Hendrik and his arguments and stuff. And Sarah gives her testimony. She walks up there and they ask her story. She has to speak some English, but then she translates it into Dutch or Afrikaans, and essentially we find out her story that, she was a mother, but her child died. The man she was living with, who was not her husband, causing the people in the audience to gasp. They all, her husband died or her man died, and so then he
left her.
Oh yeah, no, sorry, yes, he left her. Sorry, I'm tripping. But yeah, essentially Sarah started working for Hendrik and his family, and she also used to dance in front of the British colonial soldiers in South Africa, because it was a popular thing to get the big booty Nyashi women of Africa to dance for the white soldiers, I guess. And so, Sarah comes there and they're all like, she's the best. And so they bring this show to London. And they ask Sarah, are you here on your own choice? And she says, yes. And then she says, I'm an actress. And the white woman in the crowd says, you're not an actress. I'm an actress. You're a savage. You're an animal. And Sarah yells back, I'm an actress. I'm an actress. And so the court dismisses the charge. But one of the final words the judge says is like, let this be known that even an African, even a Hottentot, can get fair treatment in a British court. And that's the end of the scene.
Sir, what do you mean even?
Exactly, right? But yeah, what did you think about those things?
I just want to quickly add that during this time, also, like, they go to this bar, right? And there Hendrik meets this guy, Ro. And he's like this French guy, but he knows Dutch. And they click up and they always talk about like Sarti and how they're gonna display her. Mm-hmm. And like this guy is
and he's
becoming
also,
like a friend to Hendrik.
Yeah. And Ro, yeah, he's also a bear tamer. Like he's one of the carnival freaks at this show, but his specialty is taming a bear. But go ahead.
Anyway, so basically I wasn't especially the first time I watched this, right? I wasn't expecting people to report Sarah's case because I didn't really know anyone. I didn't really think anyone would stand up for her like that, you know. And I was surprised that this actually like went to court because honestly, like I don't know the really political and social, you know, structure of England at that time specifically.
Can I give a little bit?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, you know, if I remember right, you know, slavery lasted for like 200 years under the British. The British exported the most slaves from Africa, right? But around the time, I want to say 1815. So like at the beginning of this film, when Sarah's dead, that's like when the British abolished the slave trade, not slavery. So they still had slaves in Jamaica, Barbados, and the Americas, but they stopped. They said no more importing of slaves, and slavery was abolished in the UK in 1835, if I remember right. Right. So at this time, there is like this movement of British people who are saying not that black people are equal, but that, you know, we need to fight against this evil of slavery because Britons are above that.
So it's like a transitioning period, sort of. Like there are still some house slaves, I guess, and in London or like in Britain. And then there are like also some people who are trying to defend black people's rights in a way that they are no longer slaves, but like we also don't know what to do with them. Right.
I wish they covered that in this film because if I remember right at the time, you know, there was this legal gray area because there were slave markets in London, right, where you could go and buy slaves and see black people in cages, but a lot of them were slaves that were coming with their masters from Jamaica, from the Cayman Islands or something. So there was this gray area where legally in London, there was this fight between, okay, is slavery allowed if you bring your slaves from a place where slavery is legal into a place where it is illegal, right? Because it was like slavery was like a gray area. So I wish in that court case, they spoke about that, but maybe there's a reason. Maybe I got my time messed up, and maybe that's why they're not talking about it. I'm not exactly sure, but go ahead.
I mean, I think the most interesting part to talk about is like Sarah's testimony, and I'm sort of like, you know, coming this from a feminist point of view because even today, there are more women who own their businesses, but we still have to, especially black women. I would say like. They have to grind, you know, 10 times harder than their male counterparts. And there are just a lot of women that includes like Nicki Minaj and, you know, Megan Thee Stallion and all these like famous women who are dependent on white men and because of the industry, right? The record label belongs to a white man, for example. So, you know, it's something like you can't get rid of. It's like something that stick on your fingers and you can't just like wash it off. So it's like no matter how hard you work and try to survive and own and make your own path in the world, you have to somewhat be involved with men as a woman. Right. And it's same for like black people. They have to somewhat be involved with white people because that's like the dynamics of the world. And that's what I was kind of feeling for Sarah because it felt like, okay, she's just a worker and she is being exploited. And I feel like she's somewhat aware of it, but she can't really confess to it because if she does, then she would have no money and she's dependent on this man. And it's like for her at this point, I feel like it wasn't really an option to go back without getting money. Because then what would she do? Right.
Yeah. I mean, you know, we were talking about this earlier. It's like this film is not the traditional slave narrative in the sense like Sarah in her testimony makes the case that, you know, I'm here to work. And despite what y'all think of me, I am an actress, right? I am putting on an act, right? A part of me felt like she was saying that as a way of like affirming her own humanity again after getting dehumanized on stage. But another part also feels like, you know, she didn't know where to go or know what to do. Like, and she didn't want to just go back to her country empty-handed. Like some people, they leave their country and they feel like I have to come back pretending I'm richer and better than when I left, you know what I mean? Or else people will laugh at me. So there's that part as well. It was very interesting, you know, how the people who were supposed to be like the white liberals, those three guys who show up and say, we're from the African, anti-colonialization society, whatever. They seem like they're going to be making the argument that we're making on our couch watching this movie, like, treat Sarah like a human. Stop being racist to her. Like, stop making her act like a savage. Like, no, their argument is more like, she's being kept against her will and she's doing indecent things. Yeah. She's like, the argument was more about she's dressed up and you can see her boobs and her butt and she's dancing sexually on stage and people get to touch her, feminine parts. Like, that's what's the problem, right? Mm-hmm. And that was very interesting as well. And when Sarah says, I want to stay, those same white liberals who are fighting for her then say, prove it that you want to stay, right? So they end up fighting against her own words because it's not about what she wants, it's about what they deem to be right for her. You know what I mean? That was very interesting.
There was also, like you said, an argument about like how she was how indecent she was on stage in terms of like her looks. And the last part is like just also very interesting because when that white lady just like yells at her like, I act in the Globe Theater, like, and you just act in a circus, like that sort of thing,
It's a class thing.
Yeah, it was a class thing, and, she was like this pure white lady, and Sarah is supposed to be just someone who's exploiting the system, when in reality, the system is exploiting her, and also like what the judge said with like, let everyone know that we are defending against slavery and like, we want this woman to be free. Right. And that was sort of like, in Turkish, we say, Turkish saying time, painting the eyes, I guess. So it's like just, just a show.
Yeah, it's the trial did seem kind of showy, but I think that's also like just the British style of like parliamentary, judicial politics. Like if you've ever seen like the Brits in their, what's that called? Westminster. Have you ever seen footage of them like debating a bill or something like that?
No.
Like Boris Johnson goes up there, he says, I tell you, good sir, we need to pass this bill because it will make everybody richer in the country. And the opposition all says, oh, fuck you. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's like they have wild politics. I used to love watching that when I was a kid growing up in the morning, like, because they would show that on the news.
That's
like,
such a weird thing to do as a kid.
But I mean, you turn on the news in the morning, you eat your Applejack cereal, and you see the British politicians like hurling spitwads at each other across like the hall in Westminster.
Wow.
It's pretty fun. It's pretty fun. You should watch it sometime. Like, they don't do politics like that in the U.S. You know what I mean? Okay. It's pretty great. There's that. Man, I really liked that scene as well. And I thought it was very interesting, the last line of the courtroom scene, because he says, even in London, a African can get a free trial. And an African can find friends in Britain, something like that, right? And I find it always interesting, like how we sort of, no matter what era, we always seem to absolve ourselves of like this idea that there is bias against people or racism or discrimination, right? Because then they were saying, look how good we are, us good white folks treating this black person right. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it was so just getting rid of the guilt and the responsibility and the acknowledgement of that they literally started the slave trade. Yeah,
they literally started the slave trade.
Like, y'all did so much damage to a lot of people. Yeah. And just now, like, you're getting started to be somewhat okay, not even completely.
And then they say, look at us, we're so good, we're so right.
It's like the court doing white saviorism.
Yeah, it was definitely white saviorism. Definitely love that scene. It's very important scene. I love how this movie sort of like moves in like different stages, like the scientific scene and then the very important like stage scene and then the courtroom scene. They feel like almost mini movies in themselves. Yeah. You know what I mean? That's why I love this film so much. Shout out to Abdellatif.
And this is, one of those movies, I usually like the music in movies. And because I feel like it just like, makes the emotions even more emotional. So, but yeah, this is one of the like rarest movies that I don't mind that there's like very minimal music.
I think no music other than actually people playing music.
Yeah. So like, this is like so I feel like the dialogue is just very full. Like every second is full. Not only with dialogue, but just with emotions and imagery and other sounds that are coming from the city.
Yeah, like the sounds of horse carriages, the sounds of people walking in the courtroom. Every time, Venus like taps her feet on stage, it feels like, once again, like you're watching a documentary. Like you're there,
Yeah.
So very important. Then after that, essentially Hendrik is celebrating with all of his other carnival buddies that he won the case, and he's drinking with his buddy Roan, and Roan is like starting. The French guy, the bear tamer, says to Hendrik, like, if she has what you say she has, then I want to see it. Let me see it one day. And so he says, you will see it, my friend, in good time, hinting that, they're going to do something nefarious sexually to Venus, right? I felt like that scene was a bit much because, like, there's like this drunk Irish guy singing a song about Sarah's booty on stage, and Sarah's also getting friendly with, like, her other carnival buddy, who's another character here. Jean, right? She's this other girl who becomes important in the story later. This scene went on a bit too long for me. What did you think?
Yeah, I mean, like, when the guy starts singing about Sarah, and he also, like, bashes Hendrik's show a little bit, saying, like, he's trapping her and stuff like that. And then Hendrik gets angry and, like, he tries to fight the guy. And then after that, it keeps on going, like, this scene. I feel like after the fight, they should have cut it. Yeah. Because I think it keeps on going for another, like, 5 minutes or so. And it sort of feels unnecessary.
Yeah, because every other scene in this film feels like it moves the story along and has another sort of message to it, right? And has impact in it. This one just felt like, hey, let's mess around and get everybody drunk and film it and see what happens. You know what I mean?
I don't know. I mean, maybe it was to show, like, this is just a normal night. And even for, like, Sarah, like, she doesn't even look up and, look up at the fight. Or she doesn't even mind the song that much. Right. So,
I guess as a black person, for me, watching this film, I've been in Sarah's position so many times where you're like hanging out with your white friends and you watch them dance and you say, oh God, no, this is really bad. Like, partying with your white friends can go two ways. They get you really high because white people got the best drugs, or you're stuck listening to like Katy Perry and Pitbull hits for like the next 2 hours while you like sip on your vodka and orange juice or whatever. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. I mean, at least I felt like also for Sarah, it was somewhat of an entertainment, like, because at that time you don't have a television, you don't have that many books.
And she starts clapping too, like the songs start going, she gets drunk and starts,
It's like, somewhat of something to look at, basically, to pass time while she's getting shit-faced.
Yeah, but if you're a black person out there, I know that you've been in so many spots where you're like, this music really sucks. Yeah,
and even as a white person, I can say that. Anyway, and I've been part of the bad music club. And, also I have to say, like, the way England and Paris, which we're gonna get to in a second, looks so filthy. I was thinking, how did these people survive? Yeah, like they had to have more than Black Plague.
No, they didn't. Like people, like 1,000 people would die of dysentery in like 1 weekend.
Yeah, like, I can see that. Because like, it's gross.
But. Sarah, I think maybe the point of that whole carnival dancing scene is to show like Sarah is hanging around with like the lowest of the low. Like she's hanging out with the bearded lady and the world's strongest man, like the carnival freaks. Like even today, those people are going to be living in like the dingiest, grimiest part of the city. You know what I mean?
He's in the ghetto.
Yeah, in the ghetto, in the slums,
the
right?
Freak ghetto.
The freaky ass ghetto, right? So anyway, later on that night, Sarah gets really drunk and they carry her off to her house. And Hendrik tells her, like, while she can barely hold her head up, we're going to pull up your apron, dear, and let him take a look, let him see. And, Hendrik shows Ro and Jean, the lady, Sarah's elongated labia. And, what Sarah's still kind of awake, but she like looks at them and they look at her, and I was thinking they were gonna like rape her or do something really bad. But Rose says something very interesting. He says, "Is she baptized?" Right? And so they take her later to the church and they put water on her head and baptize her, and she gets a new name as Sarah. Before then it was like Sarti or something like that. So they give her a Christian name. What did you think was the importance of that scene?
To me, I don't think it was that important, but the way I interpret it is that like these people are like the worst of the worst. They use Sarah, and they also like get drunk, they fuck prostitutes, and they steal probably as well, you know. They're just kind of like the devil. And but the question he's asking while he's looking at another woman's vagina without her consent is she baptized? So it was, for me, it was like showing how ironic they are. Yeah. In a sense that like, you know, oh, like you believe in God but you do all this shit. Yeah, you know, it doesn't make sense.
Hypocritical.
So, yeah, that's what I got from it.
Yeah, I felt like, you know, that scene was to further show the transformation that Sarah is going through of dehumanization, in the sense like they're going to give her now not only, you know, this really shitty job in this bad record deal with this shitty manager, right? But they're also going to change her religion as well. Mm-hmm. And she sort of has no real freedom, right? Yeah, because that historically has been used like on black people, like they kidnapped us and forced us to leave Islam or leave our traditional African religions and become Christians as well. So that's what that scene meant for me, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, it was because, like, you know, they never ask her about anything, like if she wants to get baptized or not. And, you know, we don't, the thing is, like, also because Sarah doesn't know the language in either places that much. Mm-hmm. Like, you know, she only knows Dutch and she knows a little bit of English, like A1 level, and like A1 level French, you know? So it's also like I don't really understand how much she knows what's going on.
That's very true.
Like I'm sure she guessed like, yeah, they're doing something religious, right? But like, what the fuck is he actually saying? And
you know, going back to the actress Yahima Torres, because she's Cuban, right? I don't know how much French she knows, but it's impossible for her to know Dutch, for her to know like perfect English, like how they're speaking sometimes in this movie. Mm-hmm. So like sometimes when I'm looking at her face and it's just cold, you know what I mean? I can recognize that or relate to that because like you and I have been in so many places where we don't know the language and we're just sitting there like,
you're just disassociated.
Yeah, we're just disassociated. She's very disassociated. That's the perfect word to use. Yes, exactly. Like she is, you know, she's out of it because she doesn't know what's going on because of the language barrier too. Yeah. And another thing I want to say is like, you know, because Sarah doesn't speak the language and probably she also doesn't know like how to write or read at all possibly, you know, she can't tell her story. Like what we know about the real Sarah Baartman comes from other people's accounts of her. And throughout this film, there's always these scenes of like people drawing her at different points, like in the courtroom, at the actual show, right? The poster that they made for the Come See the Venus Hottentot, right? Her story is told through images, right? And it's very interesting because like, you know, I say this all the time. I'll say it again. Like we need to be able to tell our own stories. Unfortunately, if we don't, other people will tell it for us. And this is exactly why. Because Sarah's story is probably much deeper than even this movie, which I think is fantastic. Mm-hmm. Because what Sarah actually had to say, we'll never know. You know what I mean? Yeah. Which is still remarkable that we got this film and know so much about her. It is. But it literally comes from piecing together what the whites had to say about her. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. And and like just, you know, going back to the language a little bit, also imagine like being in Sarah's situation for real, where you don't know the language, you don't have Google Translate, and all you have is like this white guy who constantly lies and manipulates you. So it's like a no-win situation for her.
Yeah, absolutely. But going forward, after she gets baptized, right, she's still doing shows in London and letting people like touch her butt, and she's dancing on stage and stuff. Then one day she goes backstage, she gets naked, right, and Ro is standing right behind her, and Sarah like covers up, but Ro tells her like, God made you this way, you're beautiful, being naked for you is a blessing, which low-key is a fire line. Like I gotta use that on you one time. Being naked for you as
Don't
a blessing.
you dare.
I gotta use
that man's line on me.
I gotta use that line.
Don't you dare.
That's a fire line. The French are romantics, and that's a bar. I mean, Sarah got wet off that. Come on now.
I can smell the rotten cheese and wine smell off of this line.
You think the French smell bad now? Imagine back then. Oh man.
I never said smell.
No, but it's a stereotype. It's a stereotype.
Oh, it is, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, this one I can smell the guy.
Yeah. And so basically, Ro basically kisses Sarah, and Sarah sort of consents, but she's like looking off like, once again, what the fuck is happening? Yeah. Because he came up to her speaking French. I think so. No, he came up to her speaking Dutch, right? Mm-hmm. But she didn't really even say anything. So once again, she's like, it makes you feel like that took you back to how the whole thing started. Hendrik probably did the same thing, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Saw her naked and said, "You're beautiful, I'll make you a star, I'll give you everything." Mm-hmm. And that's what Ro did. Any comments on that?
Yeah, like I said, I was looking at like this movie through like Sarah as a woman and, like sort of feminism and also like just, women's psychology in society. And I couldn't help myself but think, does she ever get horny? Because a person, no matter woman or men, needs some sort of like sex or pleasure, I assume. And because like she had an elongated labia, I'm imagining she had, orgasms before, maybe, possibly. And I couldn't help but think maybe this is somewhat of like her also like with being unresponsive but not also rejecting him. It was somewhat of like just her trying to satiate herself as well, but at the same time, when you're distressed, you can't really feel horny. I
think possibly she used sex the same way she used alcohol, as a way to forget, basically, from time to time. Once again, we don't see her explicitly have consensual sex later on in the film, which we'll talk about. Yeah. But the same way she probably drank is probably the same way she was having sex with Hendrik or with Ro. Yeah. As like occasional ways to feel pleasure every now and then.
Yeah, because, I was thinking this woman was together with another man at one point in time, and she did have a baby. Possibly there's a possibility that, she enjoyed being sexual. Right. And it was kind of sad, like this is what she had to settle for, like this smelly man. But yeah.
Yeah. So basically, they leave London and they take this show to Paris, right? And they're doing the same sort of show they were doing in Paris, right? But the Parisian crowd is way more wild. Like when it's time to touch Sarah's butt, the British, they were a bit more standoffish and scared and prudish. The French are like, give me that ass, grab that ass. They were grabbing like, I'm saying, girl, I'll make you fertile. I was like, damn, that's aggressive.
Yeah. And also this time Ro is taking over.
Yeah, Ro is taking a bit more of the taking like bit by bit, like becoming more involved in Hendrik's place, right? And so they're doing the show, but also at night they're doing like private parties. And when they do these private parties, they're with these very rich, aristocratic French people, and the show is a bit more erotic and extreme. Like, he treats Sarah like how he does his bear, because Ro, was doing a show with bears, but now he's like making her crawl on the floor and he's straddling her from behind and making her do animal grunts and stuff like that and dance in front of the crowd of people.
Sits on her.
Yeah, straight up like sits on her.
Like makes her stand on her four hands. Like, I can't speak.
Yeah, and, basically in this crowd of, like, these rich aristocratic Parisians, he parades her around like an animal. Like, it's even more dehumanizing. Makes other people ride her as well. And, he also has Jeannie, the other girl, playing along as well. And towards the end of these private shows, the people come up and they try to talk to Sarah, and they say, "Oh, Sarah, that was remarkable. That was lovely. Can you perform at my wedding? Oh, how do you feel? Do you like London or Paris?" And she says Paris, and all the girls go crazy. Whee! You know what I mean? And they say, "Can we touch your hair?" And like for the next 20 minutes, these white women are just playing in her hair and stuff like that. And Sarah's just sitting there with this cold, ice grill and stuff. So, yeah, what did you think about when they took the show to Paris?
Yeah, like these private parties were giving Eyes Wide Shut, and we see more of that later on. But yeah, I think it was just harsher because, like, in the circus shows, it's somewhat of like similar classes, but like there's a difference of like race, right, as the people see it. And in these private parties, like, yeah, Sarah is like the only black person in the room, and on top of that, these people are like rich as well, and so they think that they are like so nice to her, and they're so like kind to her by giving her champagne and asking and being worried about her and stuff, when in actuality, like, none of that helps her, and they just once again see her as like this object to be materialized. You know, just like this. It's like it's almost like a kid like playing with a toy.
I have to say, I think in this film, if I remember right, there's like 2 of these French aristocratic party scenes, right? And I really, really love the first one. Firstly, for the outfit. Like, she's wearing this all red jumpsuit with like all these chains and stuff. Like, as sad as it is, you know, the Sarah Baartman story, you know, that outfit is fire, low key. And I really like the dance she does as well. There's this one scene when she's like, they you know, Jean starts playing like these African drums, and Sarah, you know, does what actually looks like a traditional African like foot dance, like, and you know, yeah, she is twerking and stuff like that, but in our 2024 eyes, we're looking at that and say that comes from an actual place, an actual culture. That's what she did when she was a kid. She saw her mama do that dance, grandmas, whatever, right? Like, it's actually really beautiful. And you know, when we think about, you know, what Sarah said earlier in the film, like, I'm an actress, right? You know, in Africa, they have entertainment too. People would gather around and watch the women dance and stuff like that. It makes me think, like, maybe in Sarah's mind, she's thinking, like, I'm putting on a cruder version of my culture's dance experience, right? But it is still something that I'm trying to share with the world, my African culture. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I think she wanted to do more of those dancing and plus the singing, because if you remember in one of the shows she did with Hendrik, she actually like plays a good instrument and then starts singing like a very nice song, and Hendrix get mad at her saying like, oh, you're supposed to act like you don't know how to do that. What are you doing? You're embarrassing me. And then Ro kind of does the opposite and tells everyone, oh, she has the perfect pitch, and then lets her sing the way she wants to, and then lets her like do her dance. And because of that, you know, I was thinking, is Ro different? A little bit.
There's this scene where like a classically trained violinist is playing right with Sarah on this very crude instrument, and she plays exactly what he plays, right? With like 3 strings when he has, you know what I mean? And it makes me think maybe Sarah said, I'll do the show with you, but I want to do more of what I want to do. And he's like, yeah. It's just like how if you're a rapper or a singer, you get a new record label and you say, yeah, in my new deal, I want to have more artistic control. And they say, yeah, sure, Doja Cat, but can you still twerk? You get what I'm saying? Yeah. So that's what it felt like.
That's how it began, but then it got worse.
Yeah, exactly. So, another thing I got to say about this scene is that, you know, it's interesting because, like you said earlier, there's like a different class of people, right? Like the lower class people that she's performing in front of, they leave the show and they might possibly think, oh, that really was an animal I saw. With these rich aristocratic folks, I assume for their time, they're well-traveled. Hell, some of them might even own slaves or know black people. You get what I'm saying? And they might be able to differentiate in their mind between the show and the actual person, like how they talk to Sarah afterwards. There's still some dehumanization in it. You get what I'm saying? But it makes me also look at this scene and say, is this like the 18th, 19th century version of like a male stripper coming? Some female strippers popping out of a cake. You get what I'm saying? Like when the guys come and they take off their shirts and you thought it was the policeman, right? Are those people sort of like the same as Sarah in this case? Like they're just putting on an act and show. You know what I mean?
Oh, like we know that they are not, like their life is only not about being a stripper. That's just their job. and we can differentiate, like they have normal lives outside of the strip club.
Right.
Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, I mean, that's how we look at like a stripper now, right? Or somebody that does some type of performance art personally, you know, with people, right? With Sarah in this situation, I don't know, what do you think? Do you think the people, you know, saw her as a performer in this case?
I think, like, even today, like, the example that you give, for example, for a lot of people, if you see a stripper, male or female, I feel like most people think that they are, like, loose and they sleep around, they might do drugs, they might drink a lot and that sort of thing. And when in reality, you know, there are a lot of, like, strippers who do it just for the money to get back on their feet, and they don't even, like, drink, you know, that sort of thing. Or they don't even, like, they have kids and boyfriends or husbands or something like that.
Right.
But we sort of, like, have those kind of judgments about those people, you know? And I feel like it could be the same in Sarah's case, whereas, like, oh, they know she's not going to bite them and, like, rip off their flesh, but at the same time, they still think she's possibly, like, dumb.
Because of her race.
Yeah.
Right? Like, right now.
And also how she's presented.
You're right. Also how she presents and what she does for a living, right? Because like you said, we presume things of people in the sex industry, essentially what you're saying. But I think back then, they assumed things because of performers and sex workers, and on top of that, they presumed things about her race as well.
Yeah.
Right? So, yeah, I think there was definitely a different dynamic with the upper class people, but it was still rooted in racism. In the sense, I'm pretty sure all of those people would have said, yeah, a Negro, Hottentot, whatever, is not equal to a white person at any stage, right?
Yeah, definitely. Because, like, they're still, like, you know, sort of shocked, and you can see, like, they are intrigued by just how different she is, you know? Even though they probably seen a black person before.
Right. They probably have someone working in their house.
Yeah. Like, it kind of makes no sense. And I just feel like it's worse for Sarah because at least, you know, in the circus tent shows, the lower, you know, scale shows, it's like you're not this much humiliated.
Yeah.
There's like a personal humiliation factor in these ones.
Yeah, there is. And especially as it gets worse later, right? I know it might seem like maybe just for me, I'm speaking for myself, like I'm trying to downplay the racism in this film, but I feel like you're doing Sarah a disservice with how this story is told if you don't give her some agency in her mind. If you think that she was just this dumb person who was, you know, getting abused, used, and slapped around all over the place, I really start to believe that, you know, especially with that African dance scene and other parts of the film where she shows her true self through those glimpses, that in her mind, she knows she comes from a, you know, proud people, cultural people with their own way of doing things. And maybe she thought, I'm going to try to share my culture as a part of affirming the humanity of myself and my people. You know what I mean?
I 100% agree because we checked some Letterboxd comments, if you remember, and some people said that this is just like, you know, Sarah Baartman's character, Yahima Torres, getting tortured for like 2 hours. Like, there's nothing, you know, important about this movie. And of course there's importance, but it's just like misery porn, basically. Like, that's what a lot of people criticize this movie for. But I feel like, first of all, people forget that this is an actual story that happened, and some woman went through this. So you can't really, like, you know, put a happy scene in there and then, you know, make it all seem like a fairy tale. That's the fact. And second of all, if you think you're so different from Sarah, I think you're just dumb. Because in today's world, we get exploited by every part of the system. Like, you know, if you're using social media, if you're working, if you're paying taxes, you are getting exploited. Right,
we're all getting exploited, right?
So, and most of the time, we don't say anything about it because, not that we're not aware of it, but because we just, you know, don't. And that's how we survive and that's how we live. You know, I used to do classes and I still do, like, for $1, and 30 cents.
Yeah, that's definite exploitation.
Yeah, and I still did those, not because I didn't know. Like, every time I got out of class, I said, like, this is modern, slavery.
Yeah.
And that's how I felt, but I still did it because I need it.
Right.
So that's what Sarah's doing. That's what most of us are doing.
Yeah.
Just in different contexts, but it doesn't change, like, the actual act.
Yeah. And for the people who criticize this film, because I feel like that is such a, like, you literally have to draw straws. Like, you're pulling stuff out of your ass to criticize this film, saying, oh, this is just a female black actress getting brutalized on film for our entertainment. No different than Sarah. That's a bad criticism to have, to hate on this film. You get what I'm saying? Because, like, think about any other horror movie that has a moral message, right? Like Martyrs, right? Martyrs is a story about when to give up on revenge, right? Maybe getting revenge isn't the best thing. Salo, a movie where a bunch of little kids get tortured for about 2 hours, is about how fascism is evil and it corrupts inside. You get what I'm saying?
Even mainstream movies like Saw.
Yeah. Like,
it is like worst torture, It's like one of the worst torture.
But it has a moral message. Like, that is such a bullshit, bad argument. Shame on anybody who, like, would hate on this film for that. Like, criticize it for real critiques. Maybe you don't like the direction, the lack of music. Maybe some scenes should be cut. That's fair. But, like, criticizing an actress for doing her job of acting and getting abused.
And telling an important story.
And telling a real life story. It's not some fake bullshit. Like, that really...
I get that if you don't like sad stories and you can't handle it. I get that. And if that's, like, a personal choice. And this is a sad, like, intense story. Because there isn't a moment of sunshine in this movie. For the most part. So, like, if you're not ready for it, don't watch it. But I think... if you do want to learn about the history of this woman, which is an inspirational one, I think you should see it.
It's an important one, inspirational, and we know deep down inside why people want to hate on this film. They just really dislike nasty parts of European history. Let's keep it a buck. Like, people really dislike watching slave movies because it reminds them of something that they would rather forget, or it makes them feel guilty or bad about themselves. When you shouldn't watch this film and say, I'm so bad for being white, or you shouldn't say, I'm so angry at people for making this film, for making me feel bad about being white. It shouldn't do that. It should teach us all that, dehumanization through entertainment, race science, sexism is not cool. You know what I mean? Because you wouldn't want this to happen to you. At the basic moral level, like, nobody would want this to happen to any person, white or black. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, moving on after we got off on our soapbox. We just started preaching right there. But, essentially, Hendrik is getting kind of mad at Roe because he's like, what are you doing? This show that you're putting on, it's too obscene. We're going to get kicked out of France. And Roe says, bruh, this is France. Like, nobody cares. Like, we are the freaky people that put our dicks in cheese. Like, we do everything here, man. And so they also get approached by this, like, journalist who asked to interview Venus afterwards, and Hendrik says yes, as long as you don't make any disparaging remarks. Venus rides home with this journalist after the end of the show, and she's speaking in broken French about her life story, basically saying her child died, she worked as a servant, and the journalist is saying, like, really? That's not good. I'm going to make you a princess. Right? Like, instead of telling her actual story, he created another caricature in the news about her. Any comments on that?
Yeah. That was really a very emotional scene because we see Sarah, like, just break down to tears at the end of the interview when she starts talking about her child. And also, I guess it kind of, drives the media point down because this guy is basically creating what people want to hear. And like you said, he's creating another caricature of her, like, oh, look at the big African princess that came here and ended up being in a circus show and like a sex toy to rich people. And and the reality is much more simpler, that she's just a mom who lost her child and an average person.
She essentially is a single mom who started stripping.
Kind of, yeah. Like, she wanted to follow her dreams. She was cheated out of her dreams. She was used and abused in every sense. and someone should hear her story too. But obviously people don't want that sort of thing. They refuse to accept that normal people can go through this much bad things.
I think that scene really shows how the media can twist the narrative, right? I believe it was Malcolm X that said the media will make you think that your enemy is your friend and your friend is your enemy, something like that, right? And so in this case, like, Sarah wasn't going to get, once again, her true story was not going to be told, and we only really have like the accounts of people like that who told her story, and that's not fair. They're continuing to do like the day shows that are traditional like circus shows, and then one day this guy who's a scientist comes, and his name is Georges Cuvier. He is a naturalist. He is part of the French Academy of Scientists, and he comes and says to Hendrik and Ro, like, I see here you are claiming to have a Hottentot, a true Hottentot. I would like to do some inquisitions upon her and like scientific inquiry. And so Ro and Hendrik are like, bruh, how much it costs? We don't have time for all this fancy stuff, right? And so the scientist, Cuvier, he promises, like, I'm going to give you a certificate of authenticity from the Royal Academy of Scientists that this is a true Hottentot, and you can make even more money, essentially, right? And Georges Cuvier was an actual real person. Like, so once again, this is amazing that, they're really telling this story, right? And so, Cuvier, makes the agreement with Hendrik and Ro, and Hendrik drops off Sarah at the house of the naturalist, the scientist in France, and says, you better do what they tell you to do and be nice, right? And the funny thing is Hendrik comes and he starts taking out like his African drum and like a whip and like chains and like all sorts of stuff. And the naturalists are like, bruh, you can keep all that. We don't need any of your like bullshit. Your plantation tricks, you know what I mean? So they send him on his way, and they basically, ask Sarah to like get naked, and they start like basically measuring her on all parts of her body, right? Her skull, the length from her nose to her chin, her hair, her breast size, the size of her areolas, like every single inch of her. They watch her eat after hours of examination. Another guy's like drawing pictures of her the entire time, and Sarah is asked to take off her loincloth because she refused to get fully naked. And some guy tries to like almost force her to do it. But she says, no, I'm not going to do it. And, that causes problems later. But that whole scientific scene lasts for a long time where they're like chasing Sarah over the place to like take off her loincloth. There's this funny scene where she's like walking basically naked throughout the garden, and these like three scientists are like chasing after her like the Three Stooges. That's actually kind of funny, but unintentionally low key. But what did you think of that part of the film?
Yeah, this is one of the most interesting like scenes in the movie because once again, like, we don't really know how much is explained to Sarah. So she ends up finding herself, like, with these weird white men who are touching her all over. And, they ask her to get naked. And I just cannot imagine, like, just how uncomfortable that was. Even for Yahima Torres, like, just the actor, and she would just, like, have to stand there naked and they would have to act out these scenes. I feel like that would still be, like, very uncomfortable.
Once again, applause to her. I'm sorry to interrupt, but that is, like, that vulnerability, that courage, to do that scene. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like in these scenes, there's, like, just a contrast of beauty and evil. Because the people there are evil and they're just trying to, like, they basically treat her like an animal, like she doesn't have any feelings, like she doesn't feel uncomfortable. And she's like this science experiment, right? But at the same time, this conservatory is like in the most beautiful place in Paris, in a garden where you can hear like the birds chirping. And when the painters are painting her, she looks like a piece of art, just standing like in front of all the green. And I feel like they made that a bit like intentional, because that sort of just made me think of her in maybe Africa, because it is like Africa is a place with not a lot of like nature, and
it does have a lot of nature.
Yeah, that's what I said. It's a place that has a lot of nature. So maybe like that's what she's used to instead of being in these like dirty London and Paris streets.
Right.
And I feel like, yeah, when they ask her to eat because they're trying to somewhat pursue her to take her like loincloth off, you know, she gets disturbed because these people are scribbling while she eats and they're like examining her closely and it's like super weird and silent.
Can I just say this? I'm mad at Sarah Baartman because the first thing she picked up to eat was chicken, and this is where white folks got it from. It all started, these were the first scientists to come up with all the stereotypes.
Stop.
And Sarah picking up that chicken. We could be known for eating grapes. We could be, black people could be known for like eating fried pumpkins, snails, escargot.
Wow. Okay.
I'm sorry.
Wow. That's insane. That's not true. Anyway, but that's funny. Yeah, basically she gets mad and she picks up a cloth and puts cheese, bread, and takes a bottle of wine and walks out there with like a towel.
She's having the first girl dinner too.
Yeah, it's like she's having a little picnic. I can't say that word. Anyway, and there's like there's one of the guys that drew her, and this is supposed to be like the nice guy, right? Who, you know, shows her a picture that he drew of her, and then the best part is like he drew her with a child, and he gives that to Sarah as a gift, and you know, Sarah gets somewhat, I would feel somewhat emotional because, you know, she lost her baby. And I don't think like he even knew that, but yeah, I like those scenes. You know, I feel like in those scenes she is somewhat enjoying being like that subject of art, but she gets real uncomfortable when she goes back into with the other white guys.
Yeah, once again, I think there is an angle to look at this film and say Sarah is that girl who wants to be famous, right? If Sarah were alive today, you know, under different circumstances, she might still be twerking, but this time on Instagram. You know what I'm saying? A part of her, I feel like, wants that. But also, I think this film is interesting because, like, with the guy you said he's kind of nice. There's also another scene later where he, like, dehumanizes her, too. And plus, on top of that, he goes along with all the racist scientific experiments and measurements they do on her. So I think this film goes to show, like, humans are complex in the sense, like, we're not all just foaming at the mouth racist, like how American films show racism, which I absolutely hate. We're capable of doing two things. We're capable of humanizing people and dehumanizing them at the same time. So I find that remarkable.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Like you said, we are complex because these white men, they believe that they are doing like a great service to humanity, when in reality, like they're just, you know, hurting this woman, and their science is bullshit.
Yeah.
So, but like they don't know that, so they think they are so like high and almighty.
Yeah.
And yeah, like the last scene, I think it's also like unintentionally funny because when the guys follow her and she goes back into like this barrier where she wants to get dressed and put her clothes back on, and one of the old guys like tries to look between the cracks and see her like labia basically, and she just starts screaming like leave me alone and go away, and that was just hilarious.
It was kind of hilarious, but also kind of, because the first time I watched this movie, I didn't know what exactly was going to happen. Like, low-key, I was expecting any moment Sarah's going to get, like, straight up raped. Like, raped by one person or gang raped, unfortunately. So I thought that might have been that the first time I saw it. Second time I saw it, right, I did laugh a bit. But also, this scientific scene, the scene when she's in the house with the scientists, right, it shows a bit of defiance too, and it helps you sort of like root for Sarah, because up to this point she's kind of getting like abused and beaten around and stuff like that, right? But here, like, one of the scientists tries to like grab her loincloth off, and he says, take it off, and then she like grabs him by the dick and says, you take it off first. I'm like, damn girl, okay, that's wrong. You know what I mean?
Like she does stand up for herself, especially at times where she's not with Roe or Hendrik. Like, if she's not with them because she doesn't owe any of these people anything, you know, these scientists, it's not like they're giving her anything that she wants. So it's like she's like, no, the fuck, I'm not gonna do it.
Yeah. Another thing I want to say before we get off of that too is that I think this talks about the film in a larger sense, is that, you know, what's that first adjective people think of when they think of black women, right? I'm a independent blank black woman.
Boss.
Strong. I'm a strong, independent black woman. You've heard that phrase before, right? Like, in this film, right, we get to see somewhat Sarah, you know, be a full woman in the sense that she's capable of being, like, victimized. I know people hate the idea of victim mentality or victimization because we live in this world, unfortunately, where we have more smoke for people who are victims of crimes or injustice than we do the people who do injustice or hurt victims. I don't know why that happens. But yeah, it's interesting because this film, I feel like, is probably the most important film for breaking that stereotype, which is meant to be positive in the sense that, you know, yeah, black women are strong because they fight against the system and they're, you know, able to be beautiful and gorgeous and pretty and black and bold against insurmountable odds. But in this sense, you know, we see Sarah, you know, go through so much pain and trauma, and we don't want her to be strong. You want somebody to save her, just like you would want if it was a blonde, blue-eyed woman going through all this abuse from black men. And you want somebody to come in and just take her away. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So yeah, and yeah, let's be frank too. Like this might seem like so out there for people, but imagine if like this was the story of a white woman who was kidnapped in Africa, passed from tribe to tribe, while they abused her, paraded her around like a little, you know, harlot, and then did wild experiments on her, and then slutted her out. You know what I mean? People would be like, "Oh, that's the worst thing that's ever happened," right?
Yeah, we would have like 1,000 movies made on that.
We would have 1,000 movies made on that, and whoever the white actress was that played that story would have 12 Oscars.
Yeah.
But this story, right, because it's the story of a black woman going through the worst things imaginable, we don't look at her as a soft, delicate woman. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, I think we can definitely see her like softness when she's inside the house and we see her move around. I feel like we can see it in those moments, and like just the way she carries herself, she looks like a scared child, you know, like a scared person who just wants some help.
So yeah, that was intense. I hope you're okay.
I am. Yeah.
Okay, but yeah, just moving forward in the story, you know, because Sarah refused to take off her loincloth and the scientists didn't get to see her extended labia, they refused to give the certificate to Hendrik, whatever, her main boss, pimp, whatever, right? And so he gets really mad at Sarah, and she says, "I'm not going to take off my clothes for any amount of money, nothing. I'm not going to do it." And he starts beating on her. He literally like physically attacks her and stuff like that, and says, "You've ruined it all. I hate you, Sarah. I should kill you," right? And basically he signs a paper with Roe in the next scene, which basically looks like, you know, saying, "I'm signing over rights to my property to you, Roe. Yeah. You can have my slave now," essentially, which is what it looked like, right? So now Roe and Sarah are doing the private Parisian upper class bourgeoisie shows, but now they're getting a bit more sexual, right? Like they start showing Sarah's bare ass. They pull out Sarah's titty, and then all the women in the crowd start pulling out their titty. Rose starts pulling out a dildo and having people kiss on it and lick on it, right? And then makes Sarah bite a cherry at the tip of the dildo. And yeah, the show gets really explicit. They even take it so far as to get Sarah drunk after she's been dancing all night, lay her down on the couch, and then show everybody her extended labia and all her parts, right? And they encourage people to like grab her and grope her and, you know, play with her vagina, and some people are even told to like go down on her and lick it and stuff like that. And Sarah at this scene starts crying and fighting back, and the people in the French, you know, bourgeoisie crowd say it's not fun if she's crying, right? And they start it was fun before, but now she's crying. I don't know about this, right? So they start saying like it's not cool that she's crying now, and she looks hurt, she looks sad. And Roe does the same thing Hendrik does, and says, "You're embarrassing me, you're ruining the show." And he makes Sarah get out. He yells at her. I believe he like attacks her too, because he's like grabbing her by the hair and abusing her and says, "You've ruined it. You've made a laughing stock of me. This show is over. It's done. We're finished." And he abandons her. What did you think about any of those scenes?
Just going back to like Hendrik selling Sarti to Ro. I guess that was like him selling her. And I just felt like maybe even Sarah doesn't know about that. You know, like she thinks she's a partner, she's free. Maybe, you know, she knew about the paper, but maybe Hendrik told her, "I got rid of that paper, you're free. But we're just like doing work together."
Yeah.
And that's what it felt like a little bit. Or like even if it wasn't, if Sarah knew that she was a slave or she was owned by Hendrik, like that was sort of shocking, because I feel like at that point in the movie we actually believe that she's not a slave. She's exploited and used and abused, but she's not a slave. But yeah, and then that sort of like becomes a revelation at that point. But going to the insane French freaky sex party, very like disturbing. I can smell it through the screen. And it's like all these like old white people who have like their titties out and stuff. And it was very hard to watch, especially that last scene when like they touch her vagina and, you know, she starts crying, and it is just so bad. And to be honest, like, John is always the other lady, the white French girl who's with Ro. She's always there, and before she seems like she's like the girl who just makes the sound effects. But like at this scene, she's the one who's like pulling out Sarah's tit and then like riding her too. And I got like mad at her watching this, like, what the fuck? Yeah.
Yeah, I think, you know, this film highlights that, you know, at this time in society, there was like the beginning of feminism, the idea that women should have equality with men. And, you know, I believe this was around the time of the French Revolution and stuff like that. So there was this idea about, you know, the equality of all people was the goal of the French Revolution, though they said the equality of men. And women said, well, if you mean all people, then we should be equal too. But there wasn't this overlapping thing like, hey, maybe black people are people too. And I think, you know, John sort of represents that. She might not be cognizant of it. She's not conscious of this. But I think what John's character is supposed to represent, because she's becoming more prevalent towards the end of the movie, is that there is, or what, there was or is, you can debate it, no overlapping goal of woman equality that white women include black women in. You get what I'm saying? Because John might be an equal partner with Ro. They might be getting the money and splitting it equally behind closed doors, and they might be giving Sarah crumbs. Yeah. Now, that doesn't sound very feminist to me. That doesn't sound like ending the gender pay gap. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And you can make the argument right now in society, there still is no equality. There is no unified movement between white women and black women, or white women and women of non-white backgrounds, because the gender pay gap still exists amongst races, right? It's not like all women get paid less than men. There's all women get paid less than men, then other groups of women get paid less and less than white women. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's what this part made me think about the most, other than the, you know, horrible, like, everybody, let's eat Sarah Baartman out. Though she does deserve to get her pussy after everything she went through. Not like this.
Not like this. Jesus. No, it's insane. And it's very painful to watch, like, this scene. Yeah. I don't even have words, really. Yeah,
you know, this film is, you know, about the commodification of the entertainer, and more the, you know, black entertainer too, right?
Yeah.
And
sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I just want to say, you know, like, I'm talking about this through the entertainment aspect, right? Sarah is somebody who got a bad record deal, who's a performer, but they're getting exploited, right? And exploitation takes many forms. People buy your CDs, or download your song, or buy your merch, but they want to consume more and more of their favorite artist. Literally, some people, I think if some people would, they could. If some people could, they would eat Beyonce. because that's how much they love her. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, there's a crazy, like, hive fan out there. Like, Beyonce, I love you so much. I want you inside of me, boo. You know what I mean? Like that's how crazy it is. I know I might be taking it there, but that's what that scene of, like, them eating Sarah, licking her coochie, in the sense, it was like, we love this entertainer so much. Let's do it. You know what I mean?
And also, similar to what you're saying, like when we learn that certain artists were being abused by their label, like Britney, right? For example, people say, "Oh, it's not fun anymore because now she's being tortured." Like, it's not fun if she's crying.
Yeah.
And it's like, it kind of makes you think, like, well, what did you think? But did you think everyone just got into the industry and got what they wanted?
Yeah.
Like, of course, people get threatened. They get abused. Especially women, like, they get sexually abused.
Right.
And all sorts of things. So it's sort of like, that unrealistic look where you get shocked, like, oh, like, I didn't know she was, like, in pain.
Yeah. And it's also, we're callous in the sense that when a celebrity complains about their celebrity life, like, I can't go and piss in public because everybody's pulling out their iPhone because I'm there. We all say, what do we all say?
Well, she's rich.
Yeah, she's rich.
Therapist.
Yeah, you're rich. Get over it. Hey, for the Malibu house, this is what you deal with, right? But it's not fun if they're crying, right? We make fun of it even more when they start crying, that we're making fun of them for having rich people problems,
Yeah.
But I know that's not what Sarah is going through. Like, she does not have rich people problems, but it relates to that in entertainment.
Because it is, like, both somewhat of an exploitation and also, like, making that person inhumane.
Yeah.
In a different way, but it's still, like, the same thing. And plus, like, in that scene, also what was kind of unexpected, like, because, okay, when they find out that Sarah is actually in pain, everyone, like, goes away. But, like, Rose starts to, like, hit her and, like, starts yelling at her constantly, repeatedly. No one says anything. Like, they're just like, we'll make our own entertainment. Let's go.
Yeah.
And, like, okay, so you forgot about, Sarah, and, you're just gonna go? I thought you were defending her.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they just left.
No, they just left, right? Because
it was really all about their entertainment.
It's all about their entertainment. Once they're not entertained, they walk away.
Yeah.
Right? And that's all that matters. Basically, we get fast forward to maybe a few months later, and Sarah is in a whorehouse in Paris working with Jean. And, Ro is still there. He's getting paid every time he brings a client to the whorehouse and they sleep with Sarah or Jean, right? But Jean gets more of the cut, and Jean knows this too. Like, she gets paid 15 and she gives Sarah 5 and she keeps 10. You know what I mean? And a lot of the times they're going in together. So Jean will be having sex with some white dude while Sarah, like, twerks and the white dude watches her ass, right? And sometimes it's Sarah getting banged out and, Jean, like, spanking some dude, saying, you dirty slut slave or something like that, right? Like, it's like they're doing weird freaky sex for money, right? And
it's a French brothel.
Yeah.
What did you expect?
Yeah. And the crazy thing is, in the French brothel, we also see glimpses of the French Empire, because many of the other working girls in there come from Asia, come from India, some from North Africa. Like, one of them is called Miriam or something. Maybe she's Arab, right? So we get glimpses that, once again, this is a globalized world. That, like, Sarah is not the only one, right? Like, who knows? Those other girls probably have stories equally as tragic as Sarah's, right? How did you get to France? You know what I mean? And there's this very powerful, touching scene where Sarah tells her story again to this Asian girl, but in, like, broken French, and she starts crying, and it's very painful to watch. Sarah finds out that she has a disease, maybe syphilis or something like that, because
infection in her vagina.
Yeah, which I think is syphilis, right? So the doctor comes, inspects everybody, and tells her that Sarah needs surgery immediately. I guess she doesn't have money for treatment. She ends up becoming like a prostitute on the street, and then taking tricks into her own house, right? And now she's finally, like, not with John or with Ro, right? But it's still, like, now she's at the bottom of, like, as bad as it can get. Any comments on any of those scenes?
Yeah, I mean, once again, those scenes where she's being abused, like sexually abused, I guess, or being prostituted were harsh to watch. But even though, like, she was still being exploited and she was possibly, like, hating all of this, it's still, I feel like she was still more comfortable than when she was with Ro or with Hendrik. Because we see her not having that much of a problem of, like, opening herself up because she's surrounded by women, and I think there was a little bit of more comfort that came with that, where also she was able to talk about her life and stuff. And I think she does say, like, I had a dream, right, in that speech that she gives the other girl about her life story. So from that, I mean, what I get is, like, yeah, she did want to be in arts. Maybe she wanted to be an artist. She thought, you know, people would be interested in her culture, not like this, but, you know, her dances, her singing. And this is not what she imagined for herself. And at the same time, I feel like we can see her difference from some of the other women, because I think, like, one of the women said, oh, I have a child and I send money to my child and I know, like, they are, you know, eating good and being well fed, so I'm happy. But, like, Sarah doesn't have anything to look up to and, you know, think about like that because she lost her child. So it's like, you know, it's very, like, depressive for her. Because, like, you know, when we're in, like, those type of tough situations, what do we think about? We think about our families. We think about our mom, our husband, our wives. And she doesn't have anything like that. So I feel like at this point she's just existing because it's like almost like a slow suicide. Yeah.
The thing that I got the most from the brothel scenes was the relationship with Jean, how it was a continuation of Hendrik and Ro, because Jean is saying, like, sort of the same stuff, like, we're going to make a lot of money, Sarah. We're going to do the show again, and we're going to be back on top. Don't worry, right? And it's like, you know, that sad classic story of, like, the burnt out entertainer who's trying to get another hit, you know what I mean? And following anybody who says that they can take it there, you know what I mean? But it also made me think, like, damn, like, everybody just looks at Sarah as, how much can I exploit from this person, right? And wherever she goes, she gets a leech. And Jean, towards the end of her life, is a leech. And it's sad because Jean probably can relate to Sarah possibly more than anybody, though not fully, you know, because she looks like she went through a lot too as a woman, you know. Yeah. So that's the disappointing thing. And another thing I gotta say, once again, this film is, like, so real looking. You know, like, how they have a doctor come there and, like, the way they find out if you have an STD is they tell you to pop open your coochie while I have a mirror and a candle and look inside. Like, that's so...
dildo, too.
Yeah. Like, it's so, like, it's so real. Like, once again, it feels like this is, like a man walked back in a time machine and shot this. So that's another great thing about this film in general. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, the dynamic with Jean is very interesting because also at the end, when Sarah is, you know, she was diagnosed and she had to leave the brothel because she couldn't stay there and work there anymore. And Jean is crying. And I guess, like, she feels regret or, like, guilt for, like, what she was doing to her. And they have, like, this weird, I don't know if I can call it a friendship because it was exploitative. But just weird relationship where, like you said before, she's like, she doesn't accept fully that Sarah is also a woman like her.
Yeah.
Just like her.
Yeah. And I mean, towards the, you know, when Jean finds out, like, that Sarah is sick, she says, oh, you need to go to the hospital. And Jean starts, like, crying and stuff like that. And I'm like, that's so fake. You know what I mean? It's so fake how she's, like, pretending to care. You know what I mean? Yeah. I wonder if they really thought, yo, we're taking care of her even if we're not paying her as much, even if we got her, you know, bent over backwards and having random people eat her coochie, you know what I mean? I wonder if they really thought that. Because I find that very hard to believe. Like, even putting my mind in 19th century France, whatever, it's hard for me to imagine, like, oh yeah, we treated Sarah right. You know what I mean? Like, it's hard for me to even see that.
Nobody's thinking about that. Nobody's thinking about that because everyone is busy like making money and surviving off of that.
Yeah.
So it's like not even something people contemplate about, you know?
Yeah. Basically, you know, wrapping up the story, you know, Sarah, after like doing one last trick, is left alone in her apartment overlooking like Paris from like the slums of something, right? And she's like drinking alcohol and like, you know, trying to probably smoke as well. She starts coughing profusely. She ends up, you know, laying on the floor, not being able to get up or get for help or anything, and she dies alone in her apartment, right? Kind of very suddenly, and that scene lasts for about 2 minutes or so, right? And it's kind of painful to watch as well. Her body is then picked up by Ro, and Ro does the unthinkable and drops it off at the scientist earlier, right? And he gets paid for it as well, like a big stack of money, like a money phone, an animal money phone, right? So, yeah, Ro leaves her body with the scientist, and then that's when they start their experiments, right? Like, we see Cuvier, the main scientist of earlier, like cut out her labia, measure her skull and all the other parts of her body again. They put her in a lacquer and like basically cover her up and then make a cast out of her, like how Han Solo was like frozen in carbonite by Jabba the Hutt. That's where all my Star Wars people. Well, yeah, they cut out her brain and put it in a jar, and yeah, basically like, you know, that's like where the real horror of the film, I felt like, started to kick in. Like, even in death, it's the commodification continues, right? And there's a lot I got to say about that, but then that's sort of like when the film comes full circle and we see the end of the lecture, and the guy who drew her pictures earlier and was kind of nice to her, like, looks at the painted statue of Sarah and just basically puts the cover back on her and walks away like nothing happened. And that's the end of the film, essentially. What do you think about that?
Oh, yeah. Like, when this movie ended and I was just like sitting on the couch, these were my exact thoughts. Like, there's not one happy glimpse in Sarah's life, and I just feel really depressed about that. And I also hate the world and hate people. Because, yeah, it was really hard to watch and to know that Sarah, like, you know, Sarah, like, died alone in this world, and maybe that might have been possibly the best thing for her, rather than to die with, like, Hendrik or Ro or John or something like that. But at the same time, like, you know, I cannot not imagine what she was thinking at that moment, and she might have possibly thought, like, oh, I'm just gonna like rot in this, you know, apartment, and nobody will ever know what I went through. And fortunately, we know now, but you know, she will never know how important she became in the world, and that was just like so sad to think about when she was dying in that scene. And like you said, later on, like how her body was treated when she died, it's like, you know, give her a break, like, you know, respect her body and her soul. And yeah, I feel like I'm gonna tear up just talking about it. It's just so it's like so inhumane, and she's treated like a blob of plastic, and yeah, like, you know, she's treated like a cow being you know, dissected into parts for a supermarket, basically. And it's very painful to see that. It
makes me think about, you know, how they made Sarah into this basically wax anatomical figure of her, right, for scientific study. I don't see that much difference in Madame Tussauds. You know, like how they make a wax statue of Rihanna or Lil Wayne or Brad Pitt, right? Like, of course, it's not as dehumanizing as it was because Brad Pitt's not up there naked, right? And Lil Wayne isn't either. But once again, it's about how, you know, the person can be commodified and turned into something else, and we want our commodities to last as long as possible. And that's what happened to Sarah. So it made me think about that. You know, towards the end of the movie, they show that the wax figure or the actual body, however you want to think about it, that they made of Sarah after she died was on display in Paris's National Museum until 1975. So that's crazy. Like, they had that thing up there for like 150 years. And people, like, that's definitely within like people we know's lifetime. You know what I mean? Yeah. That's how deep this like scientific racism that we are still dealing with goes. You know what I mean? It was institutionalized for a long time. And they kept her brain in a jar, up there as well, that people could look at and see. You know what I mean? Yeah. And that's just, once again, there's not much commentary other than you can say, that's amazing. And also, what does that say about our world then and now? Yeah, there's a lot there. There's a lot there.
I mean, today there are things that are similar to that, right? Like how when famous people like sell, or when they die and they sell like their, not body parts, of course, but like
their memorabilia.
Their memorabilia, like these actually belong to a person, and now they should possibly belong to their families. And they're being like auctioned for thousands of dollars just to be kept like, like just an object of pleasure. It's kind of like demonic when you think about it.
Yeah.
And just disrespectful. A
little bit. I mean, would it be cool to earn Kurt Cobain's guitar or Jimi Hendrix's Afro pick? Yeah, that's kind of cool. But what's different with Sarah is that it comes, she didn't choose that for her.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like you were saying earlier, like it was so sad for Sarah because she never knew how important she would be. One thing I always think about, what is the meaning of life? What if nobody remembers that we were here or anything like that? Like even the least among us, like a person who ended up becoming just a lowly prostitute in London has something to give to the world if we happen to look, right? And if we happen to share it, right? And you never know who can find inspiration or motivation or hope or faith in your story. And I think, how the film ends where they show that, the body was eventually returned to South Africa like in 2002, as well as the brain, her literal brain, which was still in a jar. And they show the video of that. And
her skeleton.
And her skeleton and everything as well. They return all that to South Africa, and she's greeted with, a parade. The president speaks about her, that we can't change the past, but we can give her the honor and dignity now and stuff like that. And people celebrating her name. You know what I mean? It was unintentional for Sarah. She didn't go out to be a hero. She just wanted to, who knows what she really wanted. We don't know exactly what she really wanted. But through her story, we're able to gain new levels of humanity, of caring about other people, not dehumanizing people, and thinking really critically about what does it mean to be, an entertainer, especially a black entertainer. How do we view the black body? How is the black body like continually commodified in different ways that are still exploitative in our day to day? You know what I mean? It makes us think critically about how we consume this stuff, Like after watching this, I can't look at Cardi twerking the same, no matter what. It's still there. She has the freedom to do it, but it's still like, a continuation. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Of course, you can, tie some things between those two people, and just like, female, black female entertainers today, of course. But I also don't want to like just downgrade all the work that they put in and the art that they created into that. Mm-hmm. I really don't want to like say, oh, everything that they do and everything that they put out is like similar to what happened to Black Venus. I don't want to say that. But I mean, I agree with you. And I guess like that last scene where we see Sarah's parts being returned to South Africa, that's like maybe the only somewhat happy part of the movie, because you see like these young girls that are waiting at the airport welcoming Sarah back to her country after many, many years of her body being disrespected. And also you see like possibly the same people from the group she belonged to, like doing their national dances and like their parades and stuff. And they're trying to honor her as best as, you know, they can. And that gave like somewhat of a hope in terms of like, oh, like it's so nice to see these people owning up to their culture, owning up to their like personality, their bodies, their dances, everything. And that they are here for Sarah.
Yeah. You know, this movie is so deep that I feel like it could be spoken about for hours and hours more, honestly. You know, final thoughts that I have to say. I feel like I was able to get out so much and even more, and I'm very happy how this review is turning out. But one more thing that, you know, kind of crossed my mind is that, you know, Sarah was famous for her, you know, curvaceous body, her butt essentially, right? And body types, ideal types, what is considered beautiful changes up and down, right? But you know, when it comes to Sarah and her roundness, her round butt, right? It makes me think like, in a certain way, was she like an innovator of beauty standards, right? Because she was ahead of of course, the Kim Kardashians and stuff like that. But it also makes me think about like, you know, the Sir Mix-a-Lot song, I like big butts and I cannot lie, right? Like, you know, it's recently become popular to celebrate a round butt and, you know, curves and stuff like that. And it makes me think like, should Sarah be getting innovation for being like, you know, like basically mother to all these Instagram thoughts, if that makes sense. I hope I'm not like all over the place, but I'm talking about like, is she like a beauty icon? Should we be looking at this as the story of a tragic beauty icon rather than just a tragic slave narrative, if that makes sense?
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying?
I mean, in my head, at least for me, it's not really a slave narrative. It is like, maybe we could look at it like as a missed opportunity to become like a black Marilyn Monroe, you know, at that time. And yeah, that could possibly be it, because also in the movie there are instances where men admire her beauty, like the painter, like Roe, even though we don't know how genuine he is, or like that guy in the prostitution house, and he says like, genuinely, like truly, I believe she's very beautiful, especially when she dances. Like she didn't have to say that because he already paid for it, right? And we see like men finding her beautiful, and you know, I have no doubt that she, you know, intrigued people. Yeah. But I don't think she's like the only person like that made big butts famous or being famous.
But of course,
you know, because there are a lot of women in Africa that look like her. There are a lot of Black Americans in America that look like her, right? Right.
But so, like I'm saying, like, you know, at that time it was still very far and distant, right? Like the reason why Sarah's show was popular was not only because of her big butt, it was because a lot of those people never saw a black person before, and they believe, yeah, they are savages. Oh shit, there really is one. Let's go pay and see. So yeah, but I also think there, like the many ways of looking at this film, and maybe it's too bad of looking at this now. But you could literally talk about this film and only focus on the beauty parts, right? Like saying Sarah was exploited not just because of her race or because of her femininity, but because she was a exceptionally beautiful woman of her time, and would still be considered so now, or maybe even less so now, because now we have the botched BBLs and stuff like that. But you know, the Greeks went to war for Helen because she was the most beautiful woman of her time. And the whites went to war against Sarah because she was the most beautiful woman of her time. But because she was black, you can't have beauty in the body of a black person. You have to tear it down. You have to say it's animalistic. You have to say it's not real, right? But when we look at all the images of Sarah that we have remaining, that people drew, people will say, that's a bad bitch. Let's keep it a buck. People will say, that's a bad bitch. Like, imagine Sarah walking down the street naked. Like, back then. Imagine you see that big ass and big old titties coming down the street. You'd be like, damn, yeah. I want her in my movie.
We went through that in, like, Tanzania and in Kenya. Like, we saw people who were just so naturally they had that aura of attractiveness, you know, and they were so pretty and so like curvaceous and so sensual. We both looked at them and said like, damn. And like, I didn't even get mad at you for looking at them, you know? So yeah, this is very capitalistic of me. But if Fenty Beauty, if you're listening, I think there should definitely be a collection dedicated to Sarah Baartman. And it could be like the black clean girl aesthetic. Yeah. I don't know, because I feel like that might be her look. Or it could be like the colorful, you know, South African culture reflecting palette. But definitely there should be something in the beauty industry dedicated to her. Right.
And please, if y'all do that, if y'all take AKDI's idea, give her credit and pay us both. But yeah, just...
trademark it right now.
Yeah. But please, just use the image of her face. Don't use the images that they drew of her body, because I find those problematic.
That's why I said Fenty Beauty. Because Rihanna, you know you can do this.
Yes, you know you can. But I really think that's a fascinating way to look at this film and not be so, how can I say, hurt in a sense. Because if you look at Sarah and say she was an exceptional person for her time, then you realize that she suffered the same way Jesus suffered or Martin Luther King suffered. She had an exceptional gift from God that caused people to just tear her apart. Yeah. And like the same way of a great singer who, you know, lost it in Hollywood, or a beautiful woman nowadays, right? Like, I think that's a way of looking at this film rather than just, oh, that's a black struggle story. You get what I'm saying? But like I said, what makes me love this film is because there's so many ways of looking at it, so many stories you can get from it, that it makes it endlessly conversational. So yeah,
definitely. There's a lot to like gain from this movie, and just to realize, from watching it, I definitely would recommend everyone to watch it. I know it's a sad story. I know that like it will tear your heart apart, but it's definitely worth it. Trust me, it's worth it. Yeah,
it's definitely worth it. I feel like I've never said this before, this is one of those films you have to see before you die. I would say. Especially, and you know, the whites might say, no, I definitely can go without this. If you're a black person, if you're a black person who loves entertainment, if you're a black person in entertainment, this is required watching to really contextualize what it means to be famous and black. Right?
Okay, but don't let the white people off the hook. Like, you should see this too. Especially, this is coming from me. If you spoke to the black people. Yeah. And I'm talking to my whiteys. Okay, so if you have, I would say, any silly, stereotypes about any race of group, but especially black people, even if you think they're positive stereotypes, right? Like the ones French aristocracy had on Sarah Baartman. Watch this movie, and I think you will question what you believe about black people. And I think this will enlighten you in that sense.
Very much so. So, final scores. I'm giving this, I gotta give it a 10. I don't think I've ever given a movie a 10. Maybe Book of Clarence, or I don't know, American Fiction or something like that. But after watching this film twice in my life, it leaves just as memorable an impact as the first time I saw it. And, I just love this film for how true it is, how real it is, how raw it is. Shout out to Abdellatif for telling the story. And shout out to Yahima for acting it.
I'm going to give it a 9.5. So it's up there, just like that 5 for some of those like long scenes that could have been cut. But obviously, other than that, everything is like so thoughtful about this movie. The acting is insane. And the story itself is great, but I think it couldn't have been made even like better in terms of like just being very realistic and being very raw and intense. And I really like it. I really love it. And it's a movie that you can, like you said, talk about it for hours and days and weeks and months. And I truly believe that once you watch it, you will remember it. Like, it's very memorable. So that's my final score.
Got you. Last thing I gotta say is, rest in peace, Sarah Baartman. I'm looking on her wiki right now. She died at 26 years old. 26 years old. And I don't know if the Rockstar Club is like 26 or 27.
27.
Oh, it's the 27. Either way, she's a legend for all time. And I'm also saying that her real name might have been Sahura. So once again, rest in peace, Sahura, Sarah Baartman, the Black Venus, Venus Hottentot. Your name will never be forgotten, and you had so much to give to the world, and you were taken too soon. So that's all we got to say. This has been Simon and AKDI Movie Reviews. I believe this is episode 108. Be on the lookout for more films coming soon. And also subscribe to Backpack Bandits, our travel channel. We have more content coming there. Be easy out there. Peace.